What's going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for week 4 of the NFL season. Got to get you guys ready for all of your exposure tomorrow. But first off, look at the DFS side, which went fantastic for us for last week's main slate. Nearly took down the big $5 GPP, so hopefully going to run that back here for this Sunday. And on this side, I'm going to show you guys some of my top stacks that I'm mixing in, a few game environments I'm going to be over the field on as well, but talk some game theory, also some value plays that can help you open up some salary. And then after that, towards the second half of this, we're going to focus on the Underdog and Prize Picks side, all of your pick'em and props on the sports books, give you an idea of not only some exposure that you can go out there and tail, but also some of the strategy involved in putting together slips. So by the end, you'll have a game plan for all of your exposure tomorrow. And with a lot to go through here in this video, let's get this thing started with the fantasy side. I've got my Patreon projections up here so you guys can see some of the quarterbacks that I'll be playing, but we're going to focus on some of the core plays here on the right. And the first one's going to be Jared Goff at $6,400, going up against a super tough defense in the Cleveland Browns, but one of the higher team totals on the slate. And it's only a 44.5 point total in that game, but because the Lions are such sizable favorites, they're up there in the high 20s with that total. So comparable to some of the games like the Rams and the Colts, where a lot of the chalk is going to be, and you're not getting that kind of ownership. So that's what I like at about 1.4%. And the other thing to add on top of it is that Cleveland is really good against the rush. In fact, averaging less than 3.5 yards per carry against them, which is number 1 in all of the NFL. So if they get down into the red zone, it could be a lot of passing for Detroit. And with Ben Johnson at the helm, you saw them really lean into what was working. If they had the rush going, they'll lean into that run 30, maybe even 40 times in a game at times. Whereas when the pass was working under Ben Johnson, you saw them throwing the ball 30 to 40 times at times. So Jared Goff against that really tough front seven could be throwing a lot more often than we're used to, and you wouldn't expect that with that kind of a spread, but that's the offense that they tend to run over there. So at $6,400, I think there's a lot of upside there, and not only is it low ownership at this quarterback position, but the skill position players aren't overly owned either. So if we go to an Amon-Ra, he sees about 10%, so it's not like he's completely unowned in this range, but about a third of the ownership of a Puka. So if you're looking to get off that mega chalk up top, that would be one way to do so. You can go to Jameson Williams. He's more of that secondary wide receiver option, but does have big play upside. So if he ends up connecting on a 50 to 60 yard touchdown, that could be his way to the optimal lineup, and only 1.5% ownership there. And if we go to the Porta at tight end, $4,400, he's a little bit higher owned, 7.1%. But if you're matching up a 1%er with a 7%er with maybe another 1 to 2%er like a Williams on top of that, that total ownership, that product ownership between those 3, maybe 4 players you're using on Detroit is going to be extremely low owned and pretty much going to offset any chalk that you take elsewhere. So that's really the upside with the Goff. Isn't really projection based. His median projection is only at 2.69x, which is one of the lowest that we have on this slate, but we're not playing for median. We're playing for upside. And if he throws for 3, God forbid 4 touchdowns on a Sunday, that would be his way to a near 30-point performance. And he's not going to do that every single week. We're not asking Jared Goff to get to the optimal lineup every single time. I play a portfolio approach. I play a bunch of quarterbacks. It's not even just going to be the ones that you see here on the screen, guys. This is the current Patreon version. It's my initial player pool as of an early on a Saturday. We'll be adding on to this by the time we get to lock tomorrow. So if you guys want to see the latest up-to-date version of the sheet, make sure to check out the Patreon page down below. There's a link in the description to go ahead and check that out. But guys like a Jared Goff, let me play some chalk at wide receiver. And when we're looking for the value on this slate, last week a lot of it was at running back. We had a Kenneth Walker, also a Jordan Mason, who I jammed into a lot of my lineups, ended up paying off quite nicely, as you guys saw out there before. It's a lot at the wide receiver position this time, and I'll go to wide receiver. I'll show you guys who some of those values are going to be. A Teratoa McMillan is over a 2.5x value. A Drake London's over 2.6x, nearly a 3x value on a Jacoby Myers, 2.8x on a Chris Olave. And these are 5K wide receivers that are easily usable, but it doesn't stop there. I mean, you've got a Trey Tucker down low. He's also getting some ownership, so you're gonna have to pay for it from the game theory perspective. But when we have a super low-owned game stack like the Lions are presenting to us, it lets us play some of that chalk and not feel bad about it. And in that big lineup that ended up nearly binking last week, I had a super low-owned Raiders stack with Trey Tucker spearheading it, so I'm not going to be chasing it this week by any means. I'll let the 8 to 10% play Trey Tucker this time around. But when you have that super low-owned combination, I was able to play a Jordan Mason. I was able to play a super chalky Kenneth Walker in that PM slate, and I didn't wouldn't have to worry about duplicating myself. So that's why it's not just who you're getting, it's about the ownership and the price tag as well. And having those value wide receivers is, I think, going to be a really big key on the slate. So you can use a St. Brown, a Williams, as we mentioned, but also one of those two running backs for Detroit could be used for some correlation out of the backfield. Maybe it's a Gibbs getting a receiving touchdown as opposed to on the ground against that front seven. A Tesla could be used for that same kind of situation. And then for the buybacks, there's quite a few for Cleveland. I don't think you have to have one every single time. That's why I have them down as sometimes with this buyback category. But a Jerry Jeudy, a Judkins, a Njoku, or a Fannin are all usable in that kind of role. Same thing with a Cedric Tillman. I would say that the only one of those players that's really getting any sort of ownership, Judkins is in the lower, I think, like 7 to 8% range, and Njoku's right around that same kind of ownership as well. Especially with how low owned the players on Detroit are, you don't have to worry about playing those sort of guys. So it's a low owned total game script you can go after. And I would say for the buyback options, I would mostly want to be looking at these pass catchers as opposed to a Judkins, is because they're the big underdogs. They're expected to be playing from behind. If so, it's going to be a lot of Joe Flacco as opposed to that ground game, which has me liking Jeudy, the tight ends, maybe a Tillman as my top buyback options. Next stack we've got here is a Brock Purdy at $6,100. He's going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It'll be his first game back after injury, so I guess that's the one concern here. And that's why the projection's also lagging behind too. But a lot of times we see these quarterbacks come back and look like themselves. I mean, they had Mac Jones playing pretty well out there the last couple weeks, so I don't think they were in too much of a hurry to get Brock Purdy back. And now that he's back, he's an extremely efficient fantasy quarterback. I think that he's being slept on, and it's not completely slept on. He is 4.3% owned, which is a slight step up in ownership from a Jared Goff, but still lower owned than a lot of his counterparts around him. A Herbert's getting more steam. A Patrick Mahomes is as well. I like Patty Mahomes. We'll talk about him here in just a moment or so. But at that 4.3% mark, you're getting slight leverage to some of those other players, but the stacking options are where you can really get your leverage. And CMC, not so much. CMC is going to be your highest owned running back on the slate at nearly 30%. So if you're using him as a stacking option out of the backfield, you're not really getting your leverage there. It's more so with your Pearsalls, your Jennings, or going with the Tongas at tight end, and especially with Tongas at tight end. So you can see Jawan Jennings is about 12.2%, so he's at least getting some attention from the masses, but a Ricky Pearsall is only at about 8.7%, and the buyback options in this game are fantastic as well. So if we take a look at the other side of it, you've got a Brian Thomas Jr., you've got a Travis Hunter, a Brian Strange, also a Travis Etienne at the running back position that are usable. And if we take a look at the ownership numbers on a lot of these players, they're sub 5% in almost every single case. So you can see with an Etienne Jr., he's 4.3%. Let's go to tight end just so you guys Strange right off the bat. So where is he at down here? He's super cheap at $3,200, 4.3% at that position as well. I believe Brian Thomas Jr. is the one wide receiver that's getting a little bit of steam, but still sub 10% at that position. And you can see that's lower owned than a Devontae Adams, another one of those really good points per dollar wide receivers that we have on the slate. A little bit more expensive, so not a value at that position, but I think wide receivers one, if you're going to be using a flex, almost all of them are going to be wide receivers for me this week. It's just where a lot of that value and efficient price tags are really coming in. But 9.5% there for Brian Thomas Jr. Let's find Travis Hunter on here. He's obviously a little bit cheaper. He's 0.9% if you were mixing him in. There are just so many options to get those sub 5%ers in there that you don't have to worry about playing a piece of chalk or two. So whether that's a CMC, you're okay playing that 30%er if you're mixing in one of those sub 5%ers on top of it. And you're also okay to play some of those chalkier wide receivers as well. So I like that game environment. It's one of the higher totals that we have on this week. So I think a no-brainer to get to. And you can see Trevor Lawrence down there. He's not a core play that we're going to go through, but I am stacking the other side of that game as well. So unlike the Jared Goff one where I'm not sure if I'm going to get to any Joe Flacco lineups, you might end up getting added to my player pool, but by the time we get to Sunday, we'll have to see. I know for certain I'm at least going to have a little bit of Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, I don't think it's as important to have two pass catching options with. You can see in this first stack, it's 1+ in every single lineup, 2+ in most of them with a Jared Goff. Brock Purdy's the same way. He does have a little bit of rushing upside, but with the fact that he's returning from injury, I think it might be slightly more passing heavy this week. I'm not sure if he'll be fully deployed out there as a rusher quite quite yet, so I want 2 pass catchers in most of those. But because Trevor Lawrence does have a little bit more of that rushing ability and no real injury concern that we're worried about, you can take him with 1+ pass catcher. He could score a rushing touchdown, maybe get us 40 to 50 yards on the ground, and that could be how he gets there with only a smaller stack being required. Next up, we got a Patrick Mahomes at $6,000. He's going up against that Baltimore defense, and you can see towards the top, I also am playing some Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's not really a stacking quarterback, though. A lot of times you play him with at most 1 pass catcher. A lot of that offense is so concentrated that he normally doesn't bring on 1, 2, or 3 wide receiving options with him. It's usually 1, maybe 2 that he's getting to. So I'm going to be playing him by himself sometimes, usually with at least 1 pass catcher with him. But the quarterback that I have a little bit more intrigue in is Patrick Mahomes, who has Xavier Worthy back this week. And a lot of people probably aren't considering that as much as they should. Xavier Worthy is a massive upgrade over what they were playing with before. I mean, it was a Thorn, it was a Juju, it was practice squad guys after that they were using at that position. Travis Kelce is a shell of his former self. Xavier Worthy being back, and when they get Rashee Rice in a few weeks as well, the offense is going to go from 0 to 100. And I think this is going to be an improvement over the first 3 weeks with Xavier Worthy back, and the Baltimore side is expected to be playing from ahead. They're sizable favorites, as you would expect between these two teams, especially with the fact that you have those players out for Kansas City at this point, but that's just going to mean more usage for Kansas City and their wide receivers if they are playing from that negative kind of game script. So the stacking options, I want 1+ pass catcher in every single lineup. He does have some rushing upside on top of the passing upside that he brings to the table, but because of the fact that they are expected to be in a negative game script, there's going to be a lot of lineups where I'm playing 2+ pass catchers, because if they are in pass first mode, he's trying to chuck the ball down the field, that could easily bring 2, maybe even 3 wide receiving options along with him. So Worthy, a Kelce, Pacheco out of the backfield could be potentially used here. Maybe not my favorite option. I do prefer some of these wide receivers and tight ends over him. A Juju will still be playing quite a bit. A Thorn, maybe not as much, but does have that downfield upside. All players to consider for your Patrick Mahomes lineups. And while Mahomes is 6.7%, the stacking options are extremely low owned. So in fact, if you go to that position, and I could show you guys some of those players, Xavier Worthy is only 4.2%. That is an absolute steal at that position. Hollywood Brown, I guess I should throw him out there as well. He's only 2.8%. In fact, I forgot to throw him down there as a yes, so let's just include him there right now. Super low ownership, a lot of leverage to be had there, and he's been the clear favorite wide receiver for Mahomes over the last 2 to 3 weeks. You do have Worthy back, but maybe that chemistry and familiarity is really going to pay off this week as opposed to Worthy getting there in his first week back. I think that that's a really sharp play to consider in there as well. But at tight end, Kelsey's not getting too much steam. He's 10% as opposed to 16% at a Warren. So he's higher than the average ownership, but not the mega chalk at that position. There are enough pieces of differentiation within this game stack to offset that 7%. And on the other side, there are a few pieces of chalk that you do have to worry about in terms of ownership on the buyback. For example, a Flowers getting some at 8.4%, but a Derrick Henry, even if you go to the elite tier buyback, he's only 5.6%. He's probably my favorite out of all of them, because like I was saying with Mahomes, with that negative game script, that could potentially mean that they pass more. That would also mean more usage for Derrick Henry on the other side. He's the bruising back for them. He's the one that they rely on to go ahead and run out the clock. Those fumbles have been a problem through the first 3 weeks, but I think he's going to have that on his mind. Come out for revenge a bit. These guys, especially some of the future Hall of Famers like we have with the Derrick Henry, they don't tend to wilt after a little bit of a setback. They tend to come back even stronger. This is one of the biggest, if not the biggest game that we have on the entire week 4 schedule. So at $6,000, I like that Mahomes side with him passing from behind, but also Henry as that premier buyback option, particularly because he's only about 5% owned. But if he went to the tight ends, Mark Andrews is 3.1%. Likely, potentially could be back this week. He's 0.9% if he ends up playing. You can go to a Justice Hill as well. Maybe you expect Mahomes to actually get a lead. We can't completely ignore that, right? That's another kind of game script that we could think about between these two games. Justice Hill is the running back that will play for Baltimore if they're playing from behind, so you could use him as a buyback in that kind of a game script. I like these games when you have two competent offenses going head to head, and that's why I'll be getting over the field on that one. And then the last core play we're going to go through here is going to be Drake Maye going up against this Panthers defense, and Panthers defense has been Swiss cheese against the run. So I think a ton of people are going to play Ramondre Stevenson even after some of the fumble issues, multiple fumbles against my Steelers. Thanks, Ramondre, for giving us that game there. Even Antonio Gibson came in, ended up having a turnover as well. Travion Henderson, don't sleep on him. I think he's going to get more snaps this week, but don't sleep on Drake Maye. Everyone's trying to figure out the running back situation because of the matchup against Carolina, but this is a medium total. You have the Patriots as the favorites here. In fact, pretty sizable favorites, one of the bigger favorites that we have on the slate for this weekend. Maybe it's Drake Maye just dicing them up. And I think a lot of times people get so fixated on that running back position when they see that kind of spread that they forget about getting that lead to begin with. And I think Drake Maye with his rushing upside is always going to be viable in that fantasy format. I want him with at least one plus pass catcher because of that rushing upside. I don't think you have to have 2+ in every single case, but him plus 2 pass catchers, maybe buying it back with a McMillan at the wide receiver position, are lineups that I'll be getting over the field on in GPPs. Now, am I going to play this in like a big single entry or cash lineup? Probably not, because it's got a lower floor compared to some of the other quarterbacks that we've already mixed in. But in terms of a projection, 3.35x, he's one of the best projections that we have on the slate, lagging a little bit behind a Geno Smith, but he's about half the ownership of a Geno Smith. And I think that that's not really fair or indicative of the kind of optimal percentage that these two quarterbacks have. And I mean, I'm a Geno Smith truther. He was the key to me going out there and nearly winning 50 grand last week. Drake Maye's the quarterback that I think is the better out of the two, and he's half the ownership in terms of their GPP ownership on Sunday. So give me some Drake Maye. In terms of the stacking options, they're extremely low owned. So that's kind of the thing here. It might be 5% ownership on Maye, which is average to slightly above average at the position, but his stacking options are essentially unheard of. So if we go ahead and show you guys who some of those are, and they're relatively cheap on there as well. So let's just sort by Carolina. It's probably the best way to find these. Stephon Diggs, 1.9% owned. Abute is 1.1% owned. Demario Douglas is 0.3% owned. I mean, literally, this is probably the lowest owned stack that you can think of. And then, yeah, at the tight end position, it's a little bit higher ownership with Hunter Henry being 9%, but he's a really good points per dollar projection play. 2.6x at that position is one of the best for the spend ups that we have. You can even use a Travion Henderson at the running back position, and he's at about a 35% snap share for weeks 1 through 3. After all the fumbles that you had for Ramondre and Antonio Gibson, I think that that's going to go up, and hint, hint, that's going to be something that we go through in the prop section here in just a few moments. But at $5,200, you could use him as a little bit of a stacking option as well, because he does have that receiving upside out of the backfield too. And for your buyback options on the other side of the game, you've got McMillan, who I've already mentioned, who is going to be getting some ownership, but he's a downfield wide receiver. He really fits that kind of game script if you're expecting the Patriots to get a lead. Questionable, so we'll be keeping an eye on that tag over the next day or so, but a 2.5x points per dollar projection is one of the better plays at that position. You could go to him, a Renfro at wide receiver, a Chuba Hubbard, he's also questionable but expected to play, or a Tremble at the tight end position. Every single player is sub 10%, sorry, other than McMillan, is sub 10% owned. So you're getting leverage on all of those options, and not only a projection and a game script that can end up working out in our favor, but also one that's giving us leverage in those large field GPPs, which again is massive when we're trying to fit in some of that value, like a Jordan Mason and a Kenneth Walker that I played last week. And for me, it's a lot of wide receivers, like I was mentioning before. But if you want to take a spot, a gamble, or take a stand on somebody that's going to be 25 to 30% owned, you're going to have to get that differentiation at some point. So that's why I'm so intentional about doing it with my quarterback stacks and some of the players that I'm using alongside with them, because I'm playing against 50 to 100,000 other entries. And now for the pick'em and the prop side of things, where I've got 3 slips that we're going to go through here together that you might want to consider tailing for yourself. And for the year, it's been a really solid 2025, up over 22 units for the year, and I believe it's about 25 units overall, which for 3 weeks is exactly where we want to be. It's about a 25% increase on our bankroll from year to year, and we're not even a quarter of a way through the season. So you love to see that, and let's see if we can add on top of it with some of this exposure that you guys are seeing right here. So the first slip we're going to go through is going to be for this Chiefs versus Ravens game, and I already mentioned that with the Chiefs being underdogs, I'm expecting them to pass quite a bit, so we're taking advantage of a little bit of correlation on this combination. So first off, Mahomes at 36.5, he's juiced minus 133 for his over on Pinnacle. A lot of the other sports books have him in that minus 120 to minus 130 range, so not quite to the plus EV threshold that we're looking for, but some traditional analysis has me liking it on top of it, because we're getting some correlation between these two leans. Also, a defense that's been really good against the run to start this year, so I'm expecting them to be a little bit more pass heavy. And on top of that, you've got Xavier Worthy back, so he's got one of his weapons. They can afford to do a lot more of the screens, some of the short routes that Xavier Worthy dominates. So while they might not have more yardage at that quarterback position, I think they're going to have more attempts and more completions because of the kind of personnel that they have out there. Like, you're not doing that with Juju, You're not doing that with a Tyquan Thornton nearly as much as a speedster like a Xavier Worthy. So at 36.5, I like that over, and it does fit the game script that we're going for here. But speaking of, on the other side of this game, you have an over on Derrick Henry fantasy score. I personally have his projection just a hair under 17 fantasy points. He's got over an 80 rushing yard projection on a lot of these sports books. He's minus 150 to minus 200 to score on them as well. And on Pinnacle, which is the market that I trust the most because they have the yes and the no option, when you're going out there and betting on these touchdowns, he's over minus 180 odds to go out there and score. So with the 80 yard projection, the 6 points from scoring a touchdown, that's 14 right there. He's got a 1.5 reception line. He's got 7 to a 15 yard receiving yard line, depending on the spot that you're looking at. That's how I get him to about a 17 point projection, which is solidly over this sort of number. And if they're playing from ahead, if the spread ends up coming to fruition where the Ravens should be the favorite in this kind of a matchup, then that's going to lead to more usage for Derrick Henry in the second half while he's trying to run out that clock. And the thing you'll have to mention with the Derrick Henry is that, he's had some of the fumbles to start the season. I think some of the worse and some of the weaker minded players that you have in the NFL would wilt after that sort of thing. You've got a future Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer, and a Derrick Henry who's had some of the most dominant seasons that we've ever seen at the position. I'm not worried about him whatsoever. In fact, I think he's going to have that dog in him. He's going to have maybe a little bit of an edge to him after that sort of a letdown, and it makes me like this position even more than before. So the correlation's massive. It is a full 3x payout if you take these two together, and slight line value in both cases as well. And if you've been following the channel for any given length of time, that's how we find success with these pick'em props, because the payouts are trash compared to the sports books. Like normally you would mix these in. If they were just two random even money props, you'd get more than a 3x payout if you're entering it on a sports book. So that's why when you're entering on these pick'em sites, you've got to enter slips that are leveraging the roles that the pick'em sites have that are different than the sports books. And the sports books, if you guys are running single game parlays, if you have access to DraftKings FanDuel Hard Rock Bet like I have down here in Florida, you'll know that correlation is heavily impacted on single game parlays. It's coded in. It's probably what they spend the most time on when it comes to sports books and giving you payouts for those kind of things. It might take them some time to generate that single game parlay algorithm before they'll release it out there to the public. These pick'em sites have not spent nearly as much time on it, and I can guarantee you that there's some correlation between these two. And the fact that they're giving us a full 3x payout when two random props and two random games would also give you that same 3x payout is where the value is on these sort of sites. And you can do it with 3 to 4 leg ones. That's where you really start to see the correlation roles start to come in on sites like Prize Picks and Underdog though. So that's why I stick to 2-leg slips for the most part. You don't get correlation dings like you do in some of those bigger ones, and you can still take advantage of that slightly better payout than you get on some of the sports books. And obviously a fantasy score line is not going to be available on the sports books. So that's the other advantage to these pick'em sites, is they do give us a little bit more selection than some of those other websites do. But payout wise, that's why I'm so stringent on doing correlation where we can. The exception to that rule is when we have massive line value like we have here. So let's start off with this Joe Flacco prop, which is off by 3 or 4 attempts. On books, he's at 37.5, 38.5 even on some sports books out there. I believe DraftKings earlier this morning, he might even still be at 38.5 attempts. So a 4 attempt difference here on this projection just makes no sense. And I know it has this 0.9x multiplier, so they've started to adjust for it. But when it's a 3 to 4 difference on a prop that's only about 34, you need more than a 0.9 multiplier on it, right? This needs to probably be about a 0.7x multiplier, or just bumped entirely to that 37.5, that 38.5 mark that he's at on other books. And if you guys were here for the stacking section before, Detroit are big favorites. And when that's been the case, when the Browns have been playing from behind, which is the case for most of the games that we've had this year, he's thrown the ball 40 plus times. And they did win last time out. It was a very close game against the Packers. He only threw the ball 36 times then, but even in a win, in a low running heavy script where both teams ran the ball 20 plus times, he still threw the ball 36 attempts. So that was the perfect game script. That was probably about as positive as it's going to get on the year, as over a touchdown underdog against the Detroit Lions, they're going to have to pass the ball 40 to probably even 50 times, which is why I think that this is just insane line value. And the payout's not ideal, but you're not going to find this line anywhere else. In fact, the lowest pass attempt line that I could find on a Joe Flacco, and I looked at a bunch of the different books out there, unless you're looking at an alt line, it was 36.5 for anything that was close to even money. So even that is a 2 attempt discrepancy, which is definitely worth mixing in on that sort of a number, which is why I took it with that 0.9x multiplier. Then the other side of it, we don't have anything with correlation. So this is where I'm breaking that cardinal rule that I was mentioning before. But Travion Henderson is minus 143 for his over on Pinnacle at this number, and getting close to minus 130 on a lot of the other sports books. So I think that this is going to get a multiplier at some point on a site like Underdog. It's going to bump to 3, maybe even 3.5 on a site like Prize Picks by the time that we get to Sunday. And if you guys saw the fantasy section, I'm expecting his snap rate to go up this week. And it's partially because of all the fumbles that you had from the players ahead of him last week. You had Ramondre Stevenson who fumbled twice, and Antonio Gibson who gave the ball away as well. And Henderson's been flat at 35% snap share for all 3 games so far. I think that's going to creep up closer to 50% this week. And even if it doesn't, he's averaging 4 receptions per game this year. So, and that's with the 35% snap share. That's why I think that there's so much value on this. I mean, first off, just compared to the sportsbook lines, anything minus 140 plus is getting to that plus EV line that we were hoping to find there before. So that's really good to see. But I don't even think they're accounting for the potential increase in snap percentage, because Mike Vrabel came out yesterday and said that quote unquote Stevenson was not going to be benched because of all the fumbles. But that doesn't mean that he's going to play the same amount, right? He might end up playing 10 to 15% less snaps. And if those 10 to 15% go to Henderson, this is even better value than already what is a plus EV lean to begin with. So this is the exception to the rule on these pick'em sites, is when there's a massive discrepancy to the books, like a 3 to 4 attempt difference, or a prop here that has mega juice on a lot of the sports books that hasn't quite gone that bump yet. So it's only a 2.7x payout on that combination. No sort of game scripting that we have to mention there, other than the fact that Detroit is probably going to be playing from ahead, and that is going to help us out in the Joe Flacco one. And then maybe with the fumble trouble that they've had on the Patriots, that giving Travion a better chance to get out there. So that's the second slip that I mixed in, and then we're going to have one more to mix in here as well. So let's collapse this, and this is going to be a correlated slip for the LA versus Giants game. It's going to be an over on a Maye and Hampton. It's going to be an over on Wan'Dale Robinson. And let's find, what was the last one? Herbert attempts. And this one is going to be a slightly different payout than what I got. I did get Herbert at even money, but these other two, the first 2 props here, are the exact same props and ended up mixing in. So for me and for my Patreon members earlier this week, it was 6.18x. But even at this 5.56x number, it probably isn't worse. And let me see what this would look like. So if we went with Amarian and then just Wan'Dale Robinson, this is 3.09x. This might be the better way to do it, because we're still getting the full payout. You're getting the anti-correlation and this 1.03x that's boosting it up a bit. Let's just go with this for the sake of the YouTube video. So first off with the Maye and Hampton, he's minus 137 to score on a 2-way market like Pinnacle. And the reason why we look at Pinnacle as opposed to other sports books for some of those odds is that you can take the yes and the no on them. If you're only looking at a market that lets you bet on an anytime touchdown, you're not getting the true market value, because they're going to scam you essentially. They're going to charge you more inherent juice when you can't bet on the other side. But there are sports books out there, for example, like Hard Rock Bet, that have Hampton at minus 180 to score. So the minus 137 odds is probably about as worse as it can get, and that's the 2-way market at Pinnacle. And a sizable favorite, over a touchdown favorite against the Giants, they're going to be running the ball quite a bit. And I think what really helps them out touchdown-wise heading forward is they don't have Najee Harris anymore. Najee Harris was that big bruising back. They got within the 1 to 2 yard line. It was going to be him and not a Hampton for sure. But now it's Hampton and then a bunch of scrubs behind him. So I think they're going to give him more of a role. He's probably going to play more snaps because of that as well. And we have the perfect game environment and some plus EV value on top of that. And the game environment and the kind of scripting that I was playing for in that 3-leg where we had that under on Justin Herbert was obviously them going to be playing from ahead. If that's the case, Herbert's not going to throw the ball as much. So, I mean, if you want to throw it in there for the 3-leg, I guess I couldn't stop you, but I'm never a huge proponent of playing anything after it bumps. So that's why we're going with this 2-leg instead, at least for the sake of the YouTube slip. But we've got this Wan'Dale Robinson over on receptions. And I think that the Giants are going to be a little bit less passing heavy now that they have Jackson Dart in there. So that is the slight concern that I had on this. That's also why I didn't take his over on attempts, or I didn't take his over on passing yards, is because of that kind of concern. But Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be the most utilized wide receiver by Jackson Dart. Dart is, I've heard a lot of good things about him. I've heard that he's making a lot of quick decisions, but without having a full mastery of the playbook, being his first ever NFL start and against one of the best defenses that we have in the NFL. I think that's a big X factor here, is that you've got a good pass rush. You've got a top 5 unit across the board on that defensive side. It's going to be a lot of screen passes and quick passes and short routes that Wan'Dale Robinson dominates for the Giants. And you can see that has a 1.03x multiplier here, but he's about even money, if not minus 120 to minus 130 juice towards the over on some of the sports books that we have out there. So with a boosted payout, also a little bit of juice towards the over. He was juiced under under to start the week, but ended up being juiced towards the over as the week has gone on. Probably as people have recognized that he's going to see more usage with that rookie quarterback in there. And it also fits the game script. If they're playing from way behind, if the Chargers end up getting the lead, passing less with Herbert, Hampton ends up getting into the end zone and helping generate that lead, it's going to lead to even more usage for a Wan'Dale Robinson, because if they're in pass first mode, it's more of those screens, it's more of those short routes, those intermediate routes that Robinson is getting all those receptions on. And outside of last week, he was going well over this sort of line. I mean, he was getting 8 to 10 targets for weeks 1 and 2. I know it's a different quarterback, Russell Wilson, in there, but I think that the stylistic change of going from a downfield player like Russell Wilson, who likes to chuck the ball downfield, not so much those short intermediate routes, is actually advantageous for Wan'Dale Robinson here. So sure, a little bit of unknown. Anytime you have a new quarterback in there, sometimes they play favorites, but I think that it sets up well for Wan'Dale. So that's a third slip I've already entered at this point, guys. But for every single piece of exposure that I'm entering for these slates, you guys can find those on my Patreon page. Link down below. You guys can find all of that. $15 a month. The NFL prop tier is what you want to join if you want to access that. Not only everything on Underdog and Prize Picks, but also everything that I'm taking on Hard Rock Bet as well. Completely yours if you join over there. And let's have ourselves a Sunday. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for week number 4. Best of luck with everything that you guys are entering. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That'll of course include our Monday Night Football preview, which will be dropping on Monday morning, as well as all the content throughout the rest of the season, getting you guys ready for all the big time NFL slates, as well as all the golf throughout the fall as well. This is a NFL and a PGA channel, keeping you guys ready for all of those slates to come. So if you guys enjoy that, if you learned something here from this video, go ahead and smash that subscribe button for me. But until that next time, best of luck with everything that you guys are entering. Hope to see a lot of your names, a lot of your logos towards the top end of those GPPs. Hope we can cash out on some of that prop exposure as well and pad the bankroll a bit. And what's even better than a third place finish in a 10K payout is a first place finish. So I'm looking to improve on that, keep our momentum heading into this week. And like I said, hopefully see you guys at the top.